My guest today is the prize-winning filmmaker Andrés Alegria and my old friend of many years. We go back to Andrés's radio days at KPFA, producing bilingual shows like this way back in the 1970s. He has since gone on to win many prizes as a filmmaker and video producer. Most notable is his brand new film, Song for Cesar, made with Abel Sanchez to celebrate the work of Cesar Chavez, the United Farm Workers Union, and the Chicano arts movement it inspired. A film mandated by the late African-American poet, Maya Angelou. The film, Song for Cesar, was a 15-year labor of love project. It has already opened in Los Angeles to rave reviews. The film, Song for Cesar, highlights the many musicians over the decades who have played for the farm workers movement, but it also spills over into many art forms that it also engendered, like theater, poster making, and poetry. The film documents their emergence on the scene through focusing on the farm worker movement, where they found inspiration to become activist artists. Andrés has just returned from the LA screening where he caught a cold, but thank you to agreeing for this Zoom interview. Welcome, Andrés Alegria, to La Raza Chronicles on KPFA. How did your engagement with Song for Cesar begin?
Well, Nina, thank you for having me on the show. And basically, the way it began was that I did not know Abel Sanchez. He was a musician back in the 60s and 70s, pretty well known in San Francisco. He had recorded a couple of albums, Fantasy Records, with Saul Zaentz, and played regularly with Latin musicians around the Bay Area. A friend of ours, a friend that we had in common, actually Norman Jayo, who was also a radio producer at KPFA with us, he introduced us when Abel and Jorge Santana wrote a song and recorded a song called Song for Cesar. He introduced us because he had the idea that perhaps it could be a music video, that we could do a music video. And I'd been working in television for quite a while. So we got together, discussed the idea, and produced a music video of the song.
As I walk along this land, I wonder what will be. Will I be forever searching? Will my soul be free? As I walk along this land, I wonder what will be. Will my children reach the promise of equality?
A 6-minute music video that then we turned into a DVD, which we added, a few interviews as extra material to, and gave it to the Cesar Chavez Foundation for them to use as an educational tool. They used it in, various school programs that they promote and they do, and it was received very well. At one point, Abel, my co-producer, he showed the video that we had done to Maya Angelou. He was a personal friend of Maya Angelou's and her son, Guy Johnson. And she was, when she saw the video, was so moved by the song and by the images that she insisted to Abel that he had to do something more with this project, with this concept, with this idea.
His hopes, his desires, his work will live as long as we who are alive keep it alive.
And basically, as you said, she mandated that we produce a documentary. So with the interviews and the material that we had at the time, we started doing more interviews. Abel knows every musician in the Bay Area, and it seems like on the planet. So he was able to line up interviews with musicians. And as we did more interviews, it became clear that we had to do a story that was not a retelling of the farm worker struggle or a retelling of the life of Cesar Chavez. We had to approach this from a different way. And early on, it became clear that what we needed to do was to create a history and a document that told the story from the point of view of the artists, musicians, writers, painters, visual artists, actors, who worked for many years with the farm workers movement and Cesar Chavez. And that's what we did.
How did you realize that? How did you realize that all these arts, Chicano arts movements were growing out of the United Farm Workers Union?
Well, from the work that you and I had done back in the 70s on the radio with KPFA, where we covered on a regular basis the work that was being done by artists at the time, Chicano artists, and the music that was being done, and in particular the poetry as well. I knew that that this was an element in the farm worker struggle and in the Chicano movement in general. I also knew a lot about how music and the arts had been used in social and political movements in Latin America, from the New Song movement in Chile, La Nueva Canción, from the work that had been done in Cuba and throughout Latin America, of artists working with movements to produce work and to be inspired by the movements themselves. So basically, I knew that it existed, and it was just sort of a moment when we sat down thinking about where are we going with this documentary, that it became clear that that was the direction that we needed to take it in.
Well, it's interesting that you say that you knew this from the work that we did in the 70s. For me, who did the same work and who did that work with you, the film was a revelation. I had never really put it all together to realize that the movement had engendered, the farm workers movement had engendered these other arts movements that are still going on today.
I think that along the way, we realized that this had to have come out of somewhere, right? And that there was actually, and this is the story that the artists themselves told us, that because, like, for instance, some of them came from farm worker backgrounds. They had grown up as farm workers working in the fields, and they found in their experiences as farm workers, and then with working with Cesar Chavez and working with the farm workers movement, they found a connection to the creative work that they wanted to do and felt that they needed to do. So it was really kind of an organic process where one fed on the other and turned into an artistic movement as well as a labor movement.
Who were some of the outstanding musicians that participated in the film?
I mean, there's a ton of them.
Joan Baez.
Joan Baez was very active, and she worked a lot with the farm workers movement, and she was one of the first actually to do benefits for the farm workers. I think she had a good personal relationship with Cesar, and because of the nonviolent aspect of it, that Cesar and the farm workers movement were committed to nonviolence, she felt an affinity there and felt that this was a movement that she could work closely with.
When I was with Cesar and we were working, it was so difficult and so frightening and so hot. But I think the deciding factor in whether you're going to make real social change or not is risk. Are you willing to take a risk? And the farm workers took the risks.
Then there were people like, Carlos Santana, who did benefits for the UFW.
He would bring a dimension that juntos, together, we could make a change.
Others, Danny Valdez.
He was part of the Teatro Campesino.
He was part of Teatro Campesino and then went off to do music work of his own as well as acting work.
Seeing that before my very eyes and seeing the reactions of people responding to the music really took me in a whole different direction. At the end of my 2 weeks, when I was supposed to leave, I never left.
And then others, interesting, like Taj Mahal, who was a well-known artist back then already, recorded and well-known internationally. And because he himself also had a farm worker background, he really felt close to the movement and committed himself to doing benefits, etc.
Big boss man, can you hear me when I call? Big boss man, can you hear me when I call?
And then there were others like Graham Nash of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, who are, they were a group that could fill Wembley Stadium with 80,000 fans. And he, through his awareness of movements and conditions, he really felt like this was something that he needed to support, and did so both in writing music and in doing benefits.
Feel it in your feels, pulling up your boot. No matter how I feel, don't do me no good.
Well, Andres, I'm sorry that you have a cold, but I'm putting on my glasses so I can read people the responses. You got the cold from traveling to LA for the opening of Song for Cesar. And here are some of the reviews. The Los Angeles Times: a song for Cesar doesn't need to be slick to reveal its beating heart. It's the kind of labor of love that brings recent history into colorful and tuneful focus. And with conditions for farm workers these days hardly tolerable still, maybe this movie can be absorbed as a song from Cesar too. Los Angeles Times. And this one is from Film Threat. A Song for Cesar attempts to recast Chavez as a transcendent historical figure and an ordinary individual. Co-directors Andres Alegria and Abel Sanchez successfully achieved this balance by making the viewers aware of the role of art in shaping Chavez's personal life and the role artists played in the United Farm Workers and the Campesinos movement's demands for dignity and fair wages. And there are several other LA papers that praise the film. So you must have left there, even if you came back with a cold, rather pleased.
Oh, definitely.
We would illustrate it, give it a pictorial narrative, you might say.
The essence and the start of Chicano art was right there in the middle of the UFW.
Yes, the opening in Los Angeles was definitely a great experience. And, you know, I don't mind getting a little cold as a result. But joining us at the screening to do a Q&A panel after the film were Dolores Huerta, Paul Chavez, who's son of Cesar, who is the president of the Chavez Foundation, and Connie Perez Andreessen, who's the chief administrative officer of the UFW. And, you know, the exchange between them and the audience was really uplifting and gratifying. I think that people appreciate this film because it does, you know, it does highlight what people can do, both in terms of organizing for social justice, as well as putting their creativity to a use that helps people, and in addition to entertaining people.
Well, you put your creativity into this project for 15 years.
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, you know, it was, it took us 5 years to figure out what we were doing, I think. And then it took us another 10 years to get around finishing it. And it's because it was an unfunded project. And so we had to borrow equipment and, you know, do interviews on the weekend once a month or whatever. And we were not necessarily in any rush, and we just wanted to make the best film we could.
Well, you certainly seem to have done that. How can Bay Area people see the film?
Well, the best thing to do at this point is to check our website, which is songforcaesar.com. And there,
songforcaesar.com.
Correct. And there's a banner that indicates, you know, where showings will be. And we're showing in theaters, but, you know, that's limited. So once that's done, we're going to be doing an educational release. So it'll be showing in schools, colleges, universities, all over the place. And we're also going to be streaming in a number of different ways. None of the details that I have right now, but that will be included in the website.
Way back when we were covering the farm workers, this wasn't happening, or it was just beginning to happen, that it was emerging that artists were attaching themselves to the farm worker movement and that their work was about that subject. Then later in the 70s, I would say in the 80s, when the military dictatorships turned up in Central and South America, many immigrants became part of the Latino Chicano movement. Have any of those evoked the same process where artists become part of that movement?
The one example that is in the film is Lila Downs, who is a Mexican artist and very involved in the situation in Mexico and movements in Mexico, and is a very well-known popular artist in Latin America and here in the US as well. She clearly, you know, felt an affinity to this and has incorporated the issues into her music. She has a whole album about immigrants in the US. And so I would say she's one example.
Yes, she's an excellent example. we often play her music because it's so relevant. Andres, what are your immediate plans now? Will you still be shepherding this project longer?
Yes, several things that have to happen to get this film out and being shown on a regular basis. There's still some film festivals that are upcoming. We're going to be in Dallas at the USA Film Festival in late April, and showing the film and presenting it there. I believe it's on the anniversary of Cesar's death. Antonio Rodriguez will be joining us there, as will Paul Chavez. And we're also participating in the annual convention of bilingual educators, which happens at the end of April, I believe, as well, and showing the film there and discussing it with bilingual educators from all over the country. So there's still a lot of work along those lines to get the film out that I'll be participating in somewhat. One of the ideas that we also have is to do a tour with the film, doing community screenings. For example, one idea was to follow the march to Sacramento that the farm workers did from Delano to Sacramento, where they would go and march from town to town, hold meetings at each town, and ultimately ended up in Sacramento.
That was in 1965.
Yes.
And centered around the grape boycott.
Correct. And so our idea is to follow that march and do events at each of these locations, at schools, at community centers, with the film and with musicians. One of the benefits of working with Abel Sanchez as a co-producer on the film is because he's an active musician, he pulls together, he can easily pull together musicians who have been really supportive and will perform at can perform at different events. So that's one of the things that's in the works as well.
So you see this as both an organizing tool and an educational tool?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's still plenty of work to be done on behalf of the farm workers, and of course, on behalf of immigrants in this country. So absolutely, I think that it's a film that can be used for organizing efforts and certainly for education.
So if people want to find you, if they want to hook up with this project, they can find you through Song for Cesar, CESAR.com. How did you decide upon whether it would be Song for Cesar or Song for Cesar?
Actually, the film we've titled A Song for Cesar or A Song for Cesar. And the reason we did that is so that in listings, it appears at the top, right? So for really practical reasons. But, Cesar Cesar is, as far as I'm concerned, interchangeable. People call him both. His children call him Caesar. Other people call him Cesar. So I think it could go either way.
Yes. Well, Andres, we here at La Raza Chronicles wish you tremendous success with this film. In a sense, perhaps we were the birthplace.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Nina.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Andres. Get well soon.
Thank you, igualmente.
Ciao.
Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. And you cannot stamp out a people's cause.